Tonight, I want to start with something that almost never makes headlines. It is not a battlefield. It is not a speech. It is not a missile launch. It is a spreadsheet in a government office in Eastern Europe, listing how many generators are left, how many transformers are working, how many hospitals still have backup power, how many days of fuel remain. Because in modern war, survival is counted not only in soldiers, but in systems. And Ukraine's war has become the world's largest experiment in whether democratic systems can endure prolonged assault and whether authoritarian systems can sustain prolonged pressure. This is not just a war over territory. It is a war over models of governance, over how societies organize themselves under stress, over which political systems bend and which break. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the Kremlin did not just expect military victory, it expected institutional collapse. It believed Ukraine's government would fragment, that ministries would fail, that police would defect, that courts would stop functioning, that cities would become ungovernable, that corruption and chaos would do Moscow's work for it. This was not an unreasonable assumption. History is full of states that collapse under invasion, but Ukraine didn't. Instead, something rare happened. Its institutions hardened. Civil servants slept in offices. Mayors coordinated evacuations under fire. Teachers moved classes underground. Courts held hearings in shelters. Power workers repaired lines during shelling. The state became portable, and that portability became resilience. Authoritarian systems struggle with this. They depend on hierarchy, on central permission, on rigid chains of command. When those chains are disrupted, paralysis follows. Ukraine's decentralized governance became an advantage. Decisions were made locally, quickly, creatively. Mistakes were corrected. Feedback traveled upward. This is democracy under stress. Messy, imperfect, but adaptive. Russia's system is different, highly centralized, personalized, risk-averse, information filtered upward, bad news softened, failures hidden, responsibility avoided. That structure works in peacetime. In war, it corrodes, orders are delayed, initiative is punished, reality is negotiated, and Ukraine exposed that weakness over and over. Look at mobilization. Ukraine's was collective, voluntary, socially embedded, communities organized recruitment, veterans trained civilians, networks formed. Russia's was coercive, chaotic, corrupt, draft offices bribed, exemptions sold, protests suppressed, men fled. One system mobilized trust, the other relied on fear. Fear is efficient, briefly, then it collapses. The same pattern appears in economics. Ukraine's economy shrank dramatically, but adapted. Digital government continued, tax systems functioned, startups relocated, exports rerouted, grain corridors negotiated, international partners integrated support. It became a wartime service economy. Russia's economy militarized, defense production surged, civilian innovation stalled, private investment fled, state control expanded. It became a siege economy. Both can function. One builds future capacity, the other consumes it. Information is another front. Ukraine's communication strategy emphasized credibility. Regular briefings, independent journalism, open acknowledgement of losses. This built trust domestically and internationally. Russia's strategy emphasized control, censorship, narrative enforcement, punishment. That produced compliance, not belief. Belief is stronger. Leadership matters too. Zelensky's visibility created accountability. His mistakes were public. So were his corrections. Putin's opacity created distance. Decisions appeared from nowhere, without explanation, without debate, without ownership. Distance weakens legitimacy. Legitimacy matters in long wars. Now zoom out. This is why the world is watching so closely, because Ukraine is not just fighting Russia. It is demonstrating that democracies can function under existential threat, that elections can be postponed responsibly, that emergency powers can be limited, that civil society can survive militarization, that pluralism can coexist with discipline. This challenges a dangerous assumption, that authoritarianism is more efficient in crisis. Ukraine is disproving that. At the same time, Russia is illustrating the long-term cost of repression, brain drain, institutional decay, elite infighting, information collapse, stagnation, These are slow but relentless, and other governments are learning in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East. Leaders are watching which systems deliver stability, which maintain legitimacy, which attract allies, which survive pressure. Ukraine is becoming a case study, not just in warfare, in governance, and this is why support for Ukraine matters beyond geopolitics. It is not only about borders, it is about precedent. If democracies fail under attack, others will copy the attackers. If democracies endure, others will copy the defenders. This is how political models spread, not through speeches, through performance, through survival, through credibility. The war has revealed something else, that societies are not just ruled, they are maintained by nurses, by engineers, by teachers, by volunteers, by clerks, by programmers, by truck drivers, by electricians. Ukraine's resilience is built on invisible labor. Russia's fragility is revealed when that labor is suppressed. And so this conflict is quietly answering a question that will define this century. Can open societies survive sustained violence? So far, Ukraine's answer is yes, at enormous cost, but yes, and that answer is shaping decisions everywhere, from Taiwan to Poland to Georgia to Moldova to the Balkans to the Baltics. They are not just buying weapons, they are reforming institutions, they are decentralizing power, they are building redundancy, they are preparing societies because Ukraine taught them what matters, not perfection, adaptation, not control, trust, not silence, legitimacy. This is the test of systems, and it is still ongoing. No outcome is guaranteed. Fatigue is real. Politics shift, alliances wobble, resources strain. But something irreversible has happened. The idea that democracies are weak in crisis has been challenged publicly, visibly, on camera, every day by people living under fire. And that may be Ukraine's most important legacy, not just survival, but proof. There is a moment in every major war when fear becomes politically useful, when leaders realize that emergency powers are popular, that restrictions are tolerated, that surveillance is accepted, that criticism is labeled unpatriotic, that dissent is framed as danger, that obedience becomes virtue. History shows us this again and again. Wars expand governments. They concentrate authority. They shrink liberties, and very often they never fully reverse. From World War I to the War on Terror, democracies have repeatedly discovered how easy it is to trade freedom for security and how hard it is to get it back. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a widely shared assumption among political scientists, journalists, and even some allies. Ukraine would have to become more authoritarian to survive. Martial law, media controls, expanded surveillance, suspended elections, emergency courts, military tribunals, all of it seemed inevitable. Some of it did happen, but something remarkable also happened. Ukraine refused to let emergency become identity. Martial law was declared, but it was bounded. Parliament continued to meet, opposition parties continued operating, local governments retained authority, civil courts functioned, budgets were debated, audits continued, procurement was scrutinized. This sounds mundane. It is revolutionary in wartime because it reflects a choice to treat emergency powers as temporary tools, not permanent architecture. Look at elections. Ukraine postponed national elections, but did so transparently, with legal justification, with international consultation, with clear criteria for resumption. There was no pretense, no manipulation, no emergency forever. That distinction matters. It preserves legitimacy. Media offers another example. Some outlets were merged, broadcast standards were coordinated, but independent journalism did not disappear. Investigative reporters continued exposing corruption, even during the war, even involving military procurement, even involving powerful officials, and they were not jailed. They were answered. Resignations happened. Reforms followed. That is accountability under fire, rare and fragile. Civil society remained active. Volunteer networks, anti-corruption groups, legal aid organizations, disability advocates, veterans groups, women's organizations, all continued operating, often integrated into state response, but not absorbed. They remained autonomous. That autonomy is a safeguard because it creates parallel oversight. When governments know someone is watching, they behave differently. Contrast this with Russia. Emergency powers became permanent, censorship absolute, courts politicized, NGOs dismantled, independent unions crushed, opposition criminalized, criticism equated with treason. The war became a justification for total control. Ukraine deliberately avoided that path. Why? partly history. Ukraine's memory of Soviet repression is vivid. Police states are not abstract there. They are inherited trauma, partly culture. Post-2014 civil society is strong, networked, experienced, suspicious of power, partly leadership. Zelensky's political survival depends on credibility, not fear. He cannot rule by repression. He rules by consent, even under bombardment. Another factor, international integration. Ukraine knows its future depends on European institutions, EU membership, NATO partnership, financial assistance. Those require standards, rule of law, transparency, human rights. Deviate too far and support erodes. So restraint is strategic, not just moral. Oversight mechanisms were preserved. Anti-corruption agencies continued investigations. Asset declarations were resumed. Public tenders were monitored. Whistleblowers protected, not perfectly, but persistently, even when inconvenient. This sends a message. Power is conditional, temporary, reviewable. That message prevents authoritarian drift. Security services were expanded, but subjected to parliamentary review. Surveillance increased, but with warrants. Emergency detention existed, but with time limits. Again, not perfect, but bounded, and boundaries matter. Another safeguard, decentralization. Local governments retained control over many services. Mayors had real authority. Regional administrations managed reconstruction. This dispersed power. Concentrated authority is dangerous in crisis. Distributed authority creates friction. Friction creates accountability. Civic education also played a role. Ukrainian media and NGOs actively discussed rights during war, explaining why limits exist, why criticism matters, why courts matter, why corruption weakens defense. Democracy was framed as a weapon, not a luxury. That reframing is powerful because it aligns liberty with survival, not with weakness. There were tensions. Always. Some officials pushed for harsher controls. Some activists warned of creeping militarization. Debates happened publicly. That is democracy breathing under pressure, and it is rare. Compare this to historical precedents. World War I saw mass censorship, internment, crackdowns. The War on Terror saw surveillance expansion, secret prisons, indefinite detention. Exceptionalism became routine. Ukraine learned from these examples. It tried to avoid them, not by ignoring security, but by institutionalizing restraint. That distinction is everything. It means when the war ends, there is something to return to. Institutions, norms, habits, expectations. Police states are hard to dismantle. Ukraine is trying not to build one. And this is being noticed by other democracies, by Taiwan, by Baltic states, by Israel, by small nations facing pressure. They are studying Ukraine's governance model, how to fight without losing self, how to defend without deforming, how to mobilize without militarizing society permanently. This may be Ukraine's quietest contribution, a blueprint, not just for resistance, for restraint. Because victory without liberty is hollow. Survival without rights is defeat by another name. Ukraine understands that, and so far, it is acting on it every day, under fire, under strain, under scrutiny. The test continues. Fatigue will grow, losses will accumulate, patience will fray, authoritarian shortcuts will tempt. Whether Ukraine resists those temptations will matter as much as any battlefield outcome, because wars end, systems remain. Every modern democracy is built on a quiet assumption. That war is someone else's job. Professionals handle it. Soldiers, officers, specialists, civilians live normal lives. That separation is one of the great achievements of stable societies. It allows politics, culture, and commerce to function without permanent militarization. Ukraine's war shattered that separation, not by choice, by necessity. When Russia invaded, Ukraine did not have the luxury of relying solely on a standing army. It had an army. It was trained. It was improving, but it was outnumbered, outgunned, outstretched. And within hours of the invasion, the government made a decision that would shape everything that followed. It armed society. Territorial defense forces were expanded overnight. Volunteers lined up outside recruitment centers. Office workers, musicians, engineers, students, retirees, IT specialists, farmers, people who had never fired a weapon, now preparing to defend neighborhoods, bridges, hospitals, power stations, rail hubs. This was not mass conscription in the traditional sense. It was civic mobilization, defense as citizenship, participation as legitimacy. And it worked because these were not mercenaries. They were neighbors. They knew the terrain. They knew the streets. They knew the people. They had something armies cannot manufacture: local knowledge and personal stakes. In the first weeks around Kiev, this mattered enormously. Small units blocked roads, built barricades, provided intelligence, marked enemy movements, guided regular forces. They slowed advances, confused columns, created friction everywhere. What Russia expected to be empty corridors became hostile ecosystems. The invasion met society, not just soldiers, but this model carried risks. Arming civilians can produce chaos, fragmentation.